Sabres Scoop, hosted by Brandon, Jordan, and Tom, talking everything Sabres.
All right, welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. It's a once-a-week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. We thank you for joining us today. Make sure to follow and like our content on the Hockey Writers YouTube and Facebook channels. You can also follow us on Twitter at SabresScoopTHW.
Tom, that was a heck of an intro. I'll tell you that. But I'm going to cut straight to the chase here. Today, it's somewhat of a sad day, not only because the Sabres lost once again, but because it's Tom's last show with Sabres Scoop, and he will be moving on to cover his favorite childhood team, the St. Louis Blues. And we wish him all the best, of course, but one last hurrah before he's on his way out. So we wanted to make this a great show, so that's why we have no guests today, just the original three members as it was way back when in episode 1. And Tom, why don't you kick us off with a trade that the Sabres made last week and get the show rolling?
Let's get into it. So Sabres have made their second trade of the season. So the other day they moved Eric Staal to the Montreal Canadiens for a 3rd and a 5th round pick. So far this season, they've only acquired picks. They traded Jonas Johansson to the Colorado Avalanche, Eric Staal now, Montreal Canadiens. They've picked up a 6th rounder, a 3rd rounder, and a 5th rounder. So I guess we can kind of just get into this and talk about, do you think this was a good return? Is this the right move for the Sabres? Are they going in the right direction? I'll start with you, Jordan.
Yeah, and I mean, regarding Eric Staal, thank God that I loved all the memes that came out of this trade. Like they're like, "Oh, Eric Staal," it's like Kevin Adams. You've been traded. Oh, Eric Staal's already ready. Maybe he even packed Jeff Skinner and Jack Eichel in the suitcase on the way to Montreal. But honestly, it's a pretty good deal, honestly, from the Sabres side, because they got 2 assets for him. I thought Staal was only going to go for at most a 3rd round pick. So the fact that they got a 5th round pick as well is pretty good. They did retain half of his salary, but I think this is a deal that benefits both sides.
Yeah, I think getting a 3rd and a 5th in return is awesome, especially for the level of production that Staal had this season, which wasn't very much, as we all know. You expected some salary retention, so that's fine. Sabres are pretty tight up against the cap, but I don't think that'll be an issue towards the end of the regular season, especially if they can ship guys like Hall out. But getting the 6th for Johansson and then getting the 3rd and the 5th all sounds, fine and dandy until you see that the Sabres fire a scout the next day and reduce their already pretty thin scouting department to, I think it's now just 8 people. It might even be less than that. And that was a little concerning. Why stock up the assets and the draft capital if you're not going to have the people to properly, manage those assets? So that's my 2 cents on that. But I do think that was a good return for Staal. Tom, if there's anything else you add about that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good return, but I do. My question here, I mean, the trade works. It's you get a good return, but how many picks do the Sabres need right now? I mean, I don't think this organization can sit around and wait for a 3rd and a 5th round pick to develop into an NHLer that's actually going to affect this team. This team has made the playoffs, and it's going to be 10 years now. And I think they need to start getting actual players. I think they need to. I mean, we'll see what they do with Taylor Hall. I mean, I know they're probably targeting more picks there, but I think these guys need more bodies. I don't think these guys can wait any longer. And again, you mentioned they've lost another scout now. I mean, their scouting department already is pretty. They don't have a lot of scouts. Like this is not their forte. I think these guys need to get guys who can play now and come in, help build this organization now, because they don't have time to wait.
Oh yeah, I totally agree there, because look at the Sabres developmental staff. It clearly just hasn't worked for most of these players. Look at a guy like Alex Nylander, former 8th overall pick in 2016, has not lived up to it. Casey Middlestat finally showing some signs of promise.
Yeah.
I don't think he's living up to his 8th overall status. I just don't see him being a top 10 pick worthy, even over these next few years. I think at most he's probably going to be a decent 3rd liner. And, firing and letting go of another scout. I saw this tweet by Lance Lukowski. The Leafs have 13 amateur scouts. The Sabres only have 6. And they don't even cover every region in the world. And they're primarily relying on video scouting like most people are. But want to know why they had to get these 3rd and 5th round picks, by the way, is because they didn't have any, because they acquired Wayne Simmons and Jimmy Vesey with those picks. So they actually just had to reacquire them just so they had a pick in every round. That is something. I can't believe that is happening.
So
But we're
it's a
talking.
lot of questionable moves here, but
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
And I mean,
if you look at it, it's a good return for Eric Staal, but is it a good return for the Buffalo Sabres in
it
particular?
is. It is.
We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll
But
see.
yeah, we're talking about trades. There's a potential one potentially looming here. Elliot Friedman on WGR 550 saying Toronto has called Buffalo, asking what their plans are with Ullmark in case they need to add a goalie. Talks are not serious yet. Due diligence in case news on Anderson is bad. Let's start with you, Brandon. Do you think the Sabres should be trading their starting goaltender in Linus Ullmark? And let's just say they do make the decision. What should they be expecting in return?
I think they would be pretty crazy to trade Linus Ullmark right now, especially, I tweeted about this earlier because I had come across a statistic of his that he has a 240 goals against average and 920 save percentage, right around there. Those numbers are incredible for the type of team that he's on right now. And he has 6 of the Sabres 7 wins this season. So that's a guy you can't afford to lose, even if all you view him as is a stopgap before Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is ready to play in the NHL. That's a stopgap you need to have right now, even if he's not going to be your longtime starter. So he's really earned himself, some money, in my opinion. Whether that's going to be with the Sabres or a team that he gets moved to, if he doesn't want to be there, is up to the team. I don't think they should trade him. And what player who's in trade rumors doesn't get rumored to maybe go to Toronto? In all seriousness, though, I think they would be pretty. That would be a bad decision to move him there specifically because things are looking like next season it's going to be back to the old divisions. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And Toronto is in the Sabres division, and you don't want to bolster that team, especially when you're trying to compete with them. So that's I don't think they should move him. I'm honestly not sure what type of return he would get. I would think at least some decent, prospects and picks, higher than a third for sure.
How about you,
Yeah.
Tom?
I'm gonna say the same. I think this would be a mistake unless there's some crazy offer on the table behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. I don't know why you would move the only goaltender on this team that's actually capable of getting wins. Like Brendan said, Sabres have won 7 games this season. 6 of those are with Ullmark, and they've had 3 other goaltenders in the crease trying to get wins, and they are not getting it done. Ullmark is the only one that actually kind of gives this team some hope in net, and it's been proven now. He's come back and he killed the streak. I mean, he almost killed it his first game back, but then the Sabres obviously blew that 3-goal lead in the third period and lost in overtime. But he came out next game and he won it for them with a 969 save percentage, which is pretty strong. So I think it would be a huge mistake to move him right now. I think this is a goaltender that could make a name for himself in Buffalo. He's doing a great job. I mean, you've got Luukkonen potentially coming up. Maybe next season he gets a look, but I think I would hold on to Ullmark. He's proven himself that he can be a starter on this team that's struggling, and he can still pull off good performances. He's the one getting the wins for the team, so I think it would be a huge mistake.
Totally agreed. And the Sabres, they're in an interesting position because while this roster on paper was supposed to be able to compete, they're obviously in dead last place right now. But what I don't want them to do is feel like they're backed into a corner and have to acquire some pieces to stay in that win now mode. And I'm talking about Dillon Cousins, which we can move into next, who has been injured. He's been in and out of the lineup recently with some nagging injuries, and he sustained an upper body injury against the Flyers again on Monday, and he was centering the top line, so that was a big loss. The only positive out of that is that Sam Reinhart has moved to center and has looked pretty darn good at center. But I mean, that's where he was drafted, second overall. He was a career center, so we see that a lot in the NHL with centers going to wing. But anyway, about Dillon Cousins, he could return next week, Renato said on Wednesday. Let's start with you, Jordan. Just how important, is Dillon Cousins to this team? And do you think that, in Eichel's absence, he's got to be the guy you're rolling with at the 1C position?
See, that's an interesting question there, Brandon. Dillon Cousins hasn't necessarily had the most productive rookie season. At times, I don't think he should not necessarily be the first line center on a team, especially over the long stretch, because Jack Eichel I'm just going to say it, likely isn't coming back for the rest of the season if the Sabres are smart there. And with Sam Reinhart looking good, I think you should start relying on him and seeing what you got there, because Centers are hard to acquire, as we know. And if the Sabres really do end up trading Jack Eichel, I don't know how they plan on fixing that, but that's a whole nother conversation. Because, I mean, if Sam Reinhart really can prove to be a center there, then that at least will alleviate some pressure. I think you try Cousins at center still because, he did actually look pretty decent there in the little stints he did play. And yeah, I think you got to just, you got to be careful about his deployment, because we see this with guys like Ristolainen being deployed for years incorrectly. That's why he's fine. There's just so much going on with this team. Do not play Cousins too much is what I would say. How about you, Tom?
I think it'll be, you got to be worried now. This is the second time he's been injured this season. You got to be careful with him. But I think this is, if you can get him back soon next week and again, play him in the right roles, maybe test him around. They've tested him around at center now. They've used him on the wing and just kind of, let him get a good feel for the NHL. He's adjusted very well already, but this is a season now. This season's lost. So you can pretty much do whatever. You can call guys up from the AHL. You can, again, with Cousins, test him around the lineup, see what works best, see what lines work best, who works best with him. I think it'll be great to have him back in this lineup because he's been one of the more confident, stronger, dedicated players on this roster in my eyes. So that can take us, we'll go into our next point. So Darren Dreger was talking about Sabres trade deadline. And again, we just talked about Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart and Rasmus Ristolainen are two players that Kevin Adams has been getting a lot of calls on. So I want to get your guys' take on, do you think these would be good guys to move? What kind of return would you need? I'll start with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I'll make it as easy as this and as clear as this. Keep Sam Reinhart, trade Rasmus Ristolainen while his trade value is still, on par with the market value for a right defenseman like him. I said this on THW Live last night about Ristolainen. He's a guy who's had 33 points in 5 straight seasons, at least 17 power play points in 4 seasons, and consistently leads the Sabres in hits and blocks. We've talked about this before, how he's one of the most physical, actually pretty much the only physical player on the Sabres most nights, who finishes his checks and looks like, he wants to be making it hard for the other team to play against Buffalo. So that's something that a lot of teams will value, especially if they're looking for a 3-4 defenseman, not a number 1. Sam Reinhart, on the other hand, I know it's tempting, but he's a player I really think you need to keep and build around. So I wouldn't trade him, at least not right now. Ristolainen, though, I say send to a contender and get everything back you can, reap the riches. And I think you'll be okay without him based on the defensive prospects. And especially if you draft if you get the first overall pick this draft and draft one of those defensemen, you can do a lot of good there. So Jordan?
Yeah, well, I actually just came out with an article today on the whole premise that the Sabres should be trading Rasmus Ristolainen. And 2 teams that really are interesting to me in terms of prospective suitors for this player. When the Winnipeg Jets are one, the Florida Panthers are the other. So I'm going to start with Florida here because we all saw that Aaron Ekblad injury that's likely going to keep him out for the remainder of the season. Really tough for a potential Norris candidate season there, but looking at Ristolainen, I think he could fit on that team. Now, Florida's really packed on that right side. So what I thought was Anton Strawman, he has basically the same contract as Ristolainen. It's up at the end of next season. You could take that back for them. But because you're doing a favor, maybe you could get a first or second round. I think you could get a really good prospect, a first round pick back if you're taking Anton Strawman in return. And even with the Winnipeg Jets, they have a prospect by the name of Christian Vesalainen, who hasn't really worked out there. He's a 21-year-old winger. I think if you take on the Matthew Perreault contract, which has kind of been hammering them a bit, and you give them Ristolainen, I think those trades would be the ones you should be doing because you're recouping future assets. And especially if you can acquire a prospect who's already been developed a little like Vesalainen, I think that could work. As to Sam Reinhart, no, keep some players, Buffalo. We saw what happened half a decade ago when you traded everybody. That didn't work. You have to keep some players. You can trade you trade some of your rentals. Don't trade all of them is how I would go about that. Any last thoughts on that, Tom?
I'm going to agree with everything you guys have said here. I think they should definitely be keeping Reinhart. Ristolainen's a guy you could potentially look at moving, but it would be a big loss for the Sabres. He is a big force to be reckoned with. He's pretty much the only force to be reckoned with on the Sabres. He outhits everyone every night on the Sabres. He's again, like Brendan was saying, one of the guys that he's trying to make Buffalo a team that's not easy to play against, that you're afraid to go in front of the net, because we've seen him get physical very many times this season. I mean, sometimes too physical. We've seen a lot of cross-checking penalties from him. But this is a guy that's he stands out against all the other Sabres when you're looking at guys who are putting in that extra effort, finishing all their hits, getting those extra shoves in, frustrating the opponent. So he does mean a lot to this team, but he is a guy that if you can get a good enough return, I could see the Sabres moving him.
Yeah, for sure. But guys, we're talking about trades, all this other stuff. Let's focus on the games that are actually happening. The Buffalo Sabres winless streak ends at 18 games. Gentlemen, give a round of applause. The Sabres won a game.
Golf clap.
And it was quite a beating too. They actually played pretty good as they defeated the Philadelphia Flyers 6-1 there. That winless streak, by the way, tied for the longest streak of no wins ever of the 21st century in the NHL. They haven't won a game since February, since our 4th episode of the show. We're on episode 9. So I just want to know your initial thoughts. Don Granato also gets his first career NHL win out of this, so that's another interesting factor in this. But what did you think about the Sabres ending their streak there against Philadelphia? I'll start with you, Tom.
I think it felt like it was never going to happen. Like, honestly, you almost looked at the schedule and you're like, when do you ever see the Sabres winning one of these again? And I know a lot of people were saying it was the Flyers because they have a knack of kind of giving up these sort of games here. And it did happen, almost happened the night before, but they blew that in the third period. But it ended 18-game winless streak. It's over. And what a ride. Like, oh my goodness. Like, how many shows have we been doing since we talked about it? I think
this is the 5th show since they last won.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I just feel great for the Sabres fan base here. I mean, Sabres Twitter was almost as if they had just won a major playoff series when they had won that game finally. So I think it's a big relief for this team. I think this is, maybe they can, they lost tonight, but they got a point out of it. But maybe they can kind of use this as some fuel to maybe turn this season around, try to get some wins in. And, they needed this confidence boost. I mean, losing 18 games in a row cannot be good for your confidence playing in the National Hockey League at that kind of level. So it's great they've got this out the way, and now they can look forward to the future. What do you think about it, Brandon?
Yeah, when I was playing midget hockey, I lost about 15 games in a row, and I know how that losing feels, so I can only imagine how 18 at the highest level in the world feels. I'm kidding. It definitely feels a lot worse for them, but it was something to watch. Like, you knew sort of a little bit that they had it in the bag, and later into the third period, and it felt like a sort of relief because you stop seeing memes about it. People start posting. Everybody's posting, really. Whether it was TSN, NHL, whatever, they're all posting Sabres finally end their losing streak, and it was really awesome to see. But my biggest takeaway from it was that both Reinhart and Jacob Bryson expressed that they feel like they can play more freely and have more fun under Don Granato, which is really interesting to hear. You heard a lot of players express how much they loved Ralph Krueger, absolutely loved him. And now you start to hear some guys who may have been a little stymied under his system start to say, you know what, we can play a little bit, have some fun, maybe get some things going here. Jacob Bryson said, we're trying to win a lot of games here now in the end of the season. Not that it will mean a lot, but maybe just for morale, like you said, Tom, in that locker room is what they need. So I think, it's really cool for Don Granato to get his first head coaching win in the league. And that could lead into the next question in the head coaching hunt here. Is Don Granato in the conversation? Do they keep him around in an assistant position as the head coach? Jordan, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, based off what we've seen so far, I do think he's a guy worth keeping around. I'm seeing a lot of interesting takes on Sabres Twitter. Some people believe that Ralph Krueger is the worst coach in franchise history. So, I know that kind of seems like a little bit of reactionary there, but looking at the results they had under him, I don't necessarily think that's very incorrect. And I mean, this team does look incredibly different under Don Granado. And he doesn't even have Jack Eichel to work with. Like, look how he's having to handle these lines. Casey Middlestat was the first line center in this game, so that should tell you all about the Sabres situation at the moment. I've really liked what Granado's done so far. I think he knows how to adapt, which you kind of need, especially when you have all these type of tweener players. I think they should keep him, honestly. What do you think, Tom?
I think definitely keep him around. I mean, if we're talking about head coaching specifically here, I think we got to see a lot more out of him. I think this is way too small of a sample size to see head coach, but as an assistant coach, I mean, this is a guy that he's had a lot of success in the sport. So he's obviously earned his way. He was named interim head coach for a reason. He was on the Sabres in the first place for a reason. And yeah, I think a lot of people have been impressed with what he's been able to do so far. I mean, nothing incredible, obviously, but considering what the Sabres came from, and now he's come in and, things are slowly starting to look up. They got a win. They're getting some points. We'll see what happens, but I think we need to see more of a bigger sample size before I kind of make a judgment on that. But definitely keep him around as an assistant coach because I like what I've seen.
All right, so let's just reset the episode here. We're in the middle of everything. Once again, you're watching Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube. Follow and share on Facebook and catch all the great hockey content at thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed, which once again at Sabres Scoop THW. We mentioned a little bit in passing that the Sabres lost again tonight, but you know what? I'm still riding the high of that win yesterday night, so I don't feel too bad about it. But they lost in overtime, so they did get a point, and it was actually in pretty cool fashion. Tage Thompson scored with less than 4 seconds left in the third period to tie it up and send them to overtime. So those were some good late game heroics. You've seen the Sabres not have a lot of life, even when pulling their goalie in games towards the end of the game when trying to claw back into it. So it's really cool to see them get that tonight. Lots of fight, I think they showed, in a tight game. So any general thoughts from tonight's game? Whoever wants to take it.
Well, I'm just going to say this. I'm sure you guys saw, our boy Jeff Skinner, he got a point. He also got a breakaway, but didn't have his stick there. The Dominic Moore special, as they say. I honestly thought there was a chance that could have led to a goal too. He actually played that decently well. He had 2 defenders on him, I believe. So if he had actually been able to get that pass over and that led to a chance, that would have been one of the best goals this season. But I don't know, not the luckiest game. What was also interesting to me was the Sabres only had 0.54 expected goals in those final 2 periods after having 1.65 expected goals in the first period, so they were definitely getting outchanced pretty severely in those last 2 periods, although Tage Thompson, our boy, scores the goal 4 seconds left. It's interesting. It kind of, it signals kind of what the Sabres team has kind of been like under Granado. What do you think, Tom, about the game?
I mean, the Tage Thompson goal is amazing with 3.6 seconds left in the game, but the Sabres did kind of drop the ball. I mean, they were strong in the first period, and then second period, they only put 2 shots on net. And I mean, the final shots in the game are 47-23, which can't really be ignored. I mean, it's great they got a point, but if you're playing like that consistently every night, I think it just leads to more losses. But it's a great spark for them to have again with morale. I mean, I'm sure they were pretty fired up after they scored that goal and got a point out of this game. But yeah, I mean, it looks like things are getting better. I mean, slowly but surely. I mean, at least saying that they got a point here, I don't know how long it was before, in our other episodes where they even had a point. So things are slowly turning around. I think, they're starting to get some exciting moments. So hopefully they can take something out of this 1-point game and come back and keep trying to string them together.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, even just to get some points, this is something we have to look forward to. And now I think it's time to lead into our general NHL news. We got to talk about a former Sabre here, and that's Brendan Lemieux. Yeah, he was a Sabre. Fun fact, he was in that Tyler Myers trade back in the day for Evander Kane. But he was traded from the New York Rangers to the Los Angeles Kings for a 4th-round pick. So my question will start with Brandon. Was he one that got away, or is he just not that very special by the looks of it?
He's not somebody that you're going to kick yourself over losing, but to see him have carved out a pretty steady career for himself in the NHL with the Rangers, and now he's going to continue that with the Kings. That's something that past Sabres GMs and fans are definitely looking at. And it's not just him too, right? It's Colin Blackwell who scored his ninth goal of the season for the Rangers tonight, who the Sabres had at one point also had in Rochester with the Americans. And it's players like Yoel Armia who also went the other way in the Evander Kane trade. um it's players like that you're letting go, who they're not going to be your big guys, but those are those role players and those bottom six players that the Sabres are constantly in need of rounding out their roster. So I think you're kicking yourself a little bit if you let guys like that go, but I wouldn't call him the one that got away. That title probably goes to some other people who I can't think of any right now, but there's definitely those players out there. Yeah. So that's all.
I mean, I was never around the Sabres during his time when he was part of the organization, but in terms of New York giving him away, I don't think it's detrimental. I mean, you've seen the prospect system they have coming up there. They're going to be a great team soon, so I don't think this is a player that they necessarily need on their roster. So I don't know if it was necessarily the move to do right now, but I mean, if that's what they've decided, I think they're fine in the future. I don't think this is going to affect them at all, really.
For sure. Yeah, and talking about the future. And there's an NHL tie-in here. A lot of people are getting excited about the 2022 Olympics. All right, and Stan Bowman has been named the general manager of Team USA. Now, we were talking, chit-chatting a little bit pre-show, and Jordan made a slight at Stan Bowman for a trade from his past. And this is a guy who a lot of people say is a very, very successful had a very successful NHL career, obviously the Cups in Chicago, and he's looked at as a very good GM. But why don't you tell us that trade, what you think his crucial mistake was, Jordan, that you were talking about?
Well, this does get mentioned a lot, but honestly, since that Taylor Hall for Adam Larson trade back in 2016, the worst trade in the entire league has to be that Artemi Panarin trade for Brandon Saad that sent Panarin over to Columbus. That's just my opinion. I've seen other people in the hockey community spew that as well. And it's not a good look at all for Stan Bowman. Now, it is interesting because when you look at the Chicago Blackhawks, they constantly find all these players from Europe that they can just plug in and score 30 goals randomly. So, I mean, he obviously can't evaluate people well. I do think his contract signings are bad. Luckily, you don't really have to worry about that in the USA. I think he'll probably be able to assemble a team. I just wonder who he's going to put on the third and fourth lines. I remember Justin Applicator, I believe, was on that World Cup of Hockey team, I remember. Mm-hmm. So that was, I wonder if a guy like that randomly will get on the team, but I don't know. I think there were better options out there. What do you think, Tom?
I mean, he's a qualified guy. I mean, he fits in there. Me personally, I like the now you got the Team Canada, Team USA, Doug Armstrong on the Blues, Stan Bowman of the Blackhawks. So you got a little secondary rivalry there. He's qualified for the position. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I was talking about international hockey. Like, seems like ages ago. But we'll see how this all works out. He's got the resume for it. Hopefully Canada comes out in top when they do match up next. But we'll see.
Yeah. I think the last manager of Team USA when NHLers were in it was David Poyle, who's still around the game. So and in what would that have been? Not 2018, 2014 when NHLers were last in it, right? I don't think the US did very well. They might have placed fifth, maybe even sixth. I'm not positive, but that sounds about right. So get some new blood in there. I mean, Stan Bowman's not necessarily new blood, but for Team USA, he would be. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move on here to some interesting stuff that's happened this week. Connor McDavid and Nathan MacKinnon have both received fines this week, which is interesting. You don't really hear this with superstar players, let alone two in the same week. So McDavid, obviously, a very hard elbow on Kotkaniemi against the Canadiens. And then you have MacKinnon, who chucked a helmet at Connor Garland of the Arizona Coyotes. So it's kind of funny to see this kind of attitude and emotion from these superstar players going out of their way to do this. So I'll get your thoughts on this, Jordan. What do you think of? What do you make of all of this?
Well, I'll start with the McDavid one because that caused probably the most outrage, and that was quite an awful play by him. Now, I've heard the take that, Connor McDavid does face a lot of that plays, maybe not to that level of degree, but, he does get hit a lot, but the refs aren't noticing, he gets abused a lot. So he had to kind of like let it out. And yeah, sure, maybe that's true. And luckily, Kotkaniemi didn't really get injured from that, but I don't know. I think they just need to figure out a system for this. I also find it funny that he only got fined like $5,000. I saw like if a person making $50,000, that'd be the equivalent to a $20 fine. And look at Chandler Stevenson, who just got suspended 3 games on Vegas.
Yeah.
He is technically forfeiting $71,000. So quite the different there. The Nathan McKinnon one was just kind of funny. I don't think he's winning the Lady Byng Trophy anymore. I don't think he's winning that again this year. But yeah, Kier. What do you think, Brandon, about those plays?
Yeah, the McDavid one, star players, like you look at, like, he's so fast, so he definitely, a lot of the stuff that probably gets done to him is honestly incidental. Guys can't keep up. There's a loose stick, loose skate, whatever, and he trips up, gets, beat up a little bit. But, he as a star player, much like Sidney Crosby, he also kind of people are watching, the refs are watching, making sure he's not getting abused too much. Although, he definitely gets his fair share. And the Nathan McKinnon one, you can't do that, but it did make me chuckle a little bit watching it, like picking the guy's helmet up, Connor Garland's, and then just throwing it directly at his face. Like I watched a video or a thread on Twitter. There were like 15 different, sounds that they synced up with the video, and it was really funny. But yeah, $5,000 for these guys. I don't know if it's going to deter star players from playing, like, not dirty, but like hard, defending themselves. I don't know if it's going to have an effect, but it's interesting. People have been talking about it. So
yeah.
Oh yeah.
This doesn't occur very often. I mean, I don't remember the last time. But you also look at the players who are doing this. Like, you can't, for the business of the league, you're not going to suspend these guys for a bunch of games, especially McDavid, who's up there leading the league, probably going to end up setting some crazy records, the amount of points he's putting up in a condensed season here. You don't want to halt these guys just for business sake, but I don't see this even being an issue. Like, you don't really see players doing this. I was shocked when I saw McDavid do that, because it was kind of like, whoa, like normally these are like 4th line, 3rd line grinders who are doing this kind of thing, or the guys who have a history of cheap shotting people. This is Connor McDavid, but I mean, this is the first time we've really seen him do something to this capacity. So
no, yeah, I mean, totally. And we're talking about Connor McDavid. I think it's time we bring up the potential next Connor McDavid. And, we covered the Buffalo Sabres, guys, so let's be real. When Connor Bedard, who's the player we're just going to be talking about in a minute, comes into, he's going to be a draft eligible prospect, I'm sure the Sabres will still be bad enough where they could potentially be going to them, So let's talk about this kid, though. Connor Bedard has 19 points in 10 games and was named to Team Canada at the U18s World Championships. By the way, he's only 15 years old. It's so weird seeing these guys that are so younger than me now. I'm sure Tom's starting to feel that too. I don't know. How old are you, Brandon?
22.
Yeah, so I mean, to see all these guys come into the league that are going to be younger than us now by this degree, it's certainly weird, but he's a double underager making it. He's putting up historic numbers, somewhat comparable to John Tavares' season in the OHL. He has a lot of hype on him, and I'm just curious what you guys think. Do you think, just based off probably the little bit of scouting and stuff you've seen of him, do you think he could be on that generational tier like a Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby? Let's start with you, Tom.
I mean, we've heard his name a lot. I mean, he's talked about his one. I mean, I still remember way back in the day when you heard McDavid when he was the same age. People were still kind of, like, it was kind of weird, like, oh, there's this guy Connor McDavid coming up. And so I think when your name starts to become recognized at the age of 15 years old, that's probably a sign that you're going to be pretty damn good one day. Obviously, he's young, so we can't really call it right now. He's going to be 100%. He's the next generational player in the NHL. But the way things are looking right now, the trajectory he's on, just the way he's been able to build his name up at the age of 15, there's a sign he's probably going to be a very special player in the coming years when he does eventually get drafted. What do you think, Brendan?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if Wayne Gretzky was the great one and Connor McDavid was the next one, then, Connor Bedard is going to be the next, the next great one or something like that. That's certainly an impressive stat line, though. Pretty much 2 points per game as a 15-year-old, and then being named to the U18 World Championship team for Canada. That's certainly very impressive. of to have on your resume as 15-year-old. I think back to when I was 15. I felt, he's a kid, and this is a guy we're already talking about being a generational player. Like, I'm at what age is McDavid and them going to be, when he comes into the league? Like, it's crazy how Connor McDavid's going to be like sort of like the Crosby to the Bedard. It's crazy, but it'll be cool to follow his career, leading up to the draft year. I hope the Sabres aren't bad by then, but if they are, and maybe they'll get a gift wrapped up for him at the draft. I don't know, but we'll see how that plays out. It's certainly interesting.
Another tank season.
Just before we end here, guys, we do have some breaking news. Elliot Friedman reporting that Vegas is only dressing 16 skaters tonight because they're that up against the Caps. They can only dress 16 skaters. That's pretty hilarious. I just wanted to say that. I'm curious.
Wow.
I mean, just by the time people hear this, they'll know the results. So
I know, so we'll have to see. I'm sure it's going to be a great one. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up the final show here with Tom. We're going to be introducing our new co-host who will be on next week over our Twitter. So check it out. We're going to leave it a surprise for now, but we are going to hype it up. Make sure you follow us on our Twitter to know. And with that, it's time to wrap up the show. So we thank you for joining us. This has been Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and follow the show on our Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. Don't miss out on all of the great hockey content at thehockeywriters.com. For Tom and Brandon, this is Jordan, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.